start with Ankur. Please tell us a little bit about yourself.
All right, so I'll be happy to be the first one to go. So yeah, my name is Ankur Jain. I'm a founder of a seed stage firm called Emergent Ventures. We invest in what we call intelligent software, which is companies typically leveraging data more intelligently, whether using techniques like AI or otherwise, across the enterprise. Typically, things like sales, marketing, HR operations, IT infrastructure, logistics. Some of these companies are horizontal, some are more vertical. And we're often the first institutional investors in these companies, typically writing checks up to $1.5 million as a lead or a co-lead investor in these early stage companies. Portfolio about 25 plus companies. We're about a 4-year-old firm. And one of the key focus areas for us is companies leveraging emerging tech hubs to develop product. So a lot of our companies are leveraging places like India, Austin, Atlanta. We've got a company out of Nebraska. But we like companies leveraging the Silicon Valley mindset, and sometimes they'll have part of the team here, but bulk of the team and product has been developed outside the Valley in some of the emerging tech hubs. That's one of our areas we've developed good expertise in.
Very cool. Thank you, Ankur. Ashok, would you like to go next?
Sure. I am probably the non-VC on the panel. Oh, I should say former VC on the panel. So I am an entrepreneur. I run a software company called Sequence. We provide software that startups use to create their financial projections. So when they need to go raise money or get a bank loan, we have users who have raised millions in loans, or they need to create a budget and track performance. We also work with some non-profit organizations. So we're familiar with how those things work for them. So that's my background. I have a background in tech and finance, and very much look forward to the questions.
Thank you, Ashok. I've known all of you guys since such a long time, and it's an honor to have you on this panel and to actually get to talk to you.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Karthik, would you like to go next?
So I am an operator as well and a non-VC in this panel as well, Ashok.
Welcome. Yeah. There's life after VC, yeah.
So I'm a serial entrepreneur as well. Right now, I run the healthcare practice for a company called Skyflow. Prior to this, I co-founded 2 companies. One was Suki, which makes a digital assistant for doctors to help them with their administrative tasks and their documentation. I've been in enterprise tech for the past 20 years. 15 years in SaaS, was early in Salesforce, built out most of their data platform and infrastructure. Then I spent a couple of years at Oracle building out their big data business in the public cloud before making the shift into healthcare. So spent a year as a VC, as an EIR, doing investments before jumping into an operating role, right, and starting Suki. So that's my background.
Wow.
And you have the best mural, I must say.
Yeah.
The background is awesome.
Thank you. It's 10 years old, so.
It's really, really cool.
Very, very pretty. Yeah. Ashmeet, would you like to go next?
Thank you, Shilpi. I don't know how to describe myself as a venture capitalist or an operator because I've done both those jobs. But yes. Usually I describe myself as an engineer because I'm really a geek, a nerd at heart. I studied operating systems, which is near and dear to me. And now I run Engineering Capital, which is a venture capital firm focused on software companies where there is still technical risk. In other words, they are doing something technically challenging, technically innovative in software. And we are typically the first investor. In fact, I'm the first investor in my entire portfolio right now. So if you were to visit my website, all those companies, and very happy to be here today. Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you, Ashmeet, for that. And I think Juliet Marie is having some technical difficulty because she said she's on it, but she's not. So we'll figure that out. One of the moderators, could you please call her and make sure she has the right to join? Moderators?
Yes.
Thank you. All right. So let's get started with this. This is awesome. What kind of questions do we have for our esteemed panelists? So I know that some of the community members had questions. One of them started with like, how do you differentiate between like, or even choose a path like corporate ladder versus when is the right time to start your own venture? Like, what are your thoughts on that? I'll pass the mic to each and every one. So I think that would make a fascinating discussion. Ashok, do you want to go?
Yeah, sure. I think that entrepreneurship is really hard. So it's not something you should enter into lightly. And I would say that uh, a good idea is not, it's a necessary but not sufficient condition for you to get into it. So you need to make sure that you have some degree of, or some ability to continue for some period of time, because you're going to have a lot of the load on your shoulders. So I think that's it's when you're very young and you do it in a certain way that
I'm
that
trying
might work
to
a little.
reach Juliet Murray.
Come again, Susanna.
Okay, we do. Are you on the panel already? Because
Susanna, can you mute yourself, please?
Okay, sure.
Sorry.
So anyway, so that's my overall thought. I think if you have the ability, then go for it. And there are different entrepreneurs do it differently, and but you should be prepared for a rough ride. It's not it's not for the faint of heart.
Faint of heart.
That's not to say that's not to say you shouldn't do it. That's to just say that don't compound the difficulty of building an enterprise with the difficulty of your personal situation. So
yeah,
Well,
but
let me build on.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Go ahead.
I was going to jump in, Shilpi, and build on what Ashok says, because I think I agree with the sentiment that he is describing. I myself started and ran a company for 5 years. That's why I have gray hair now. I used to have black hair before that. So I know how hard it is.
very
But,
uniformly distributed though. So
that's pure luck. So genetics, I guess. But I want to build on what you said, Ashok, because it is very hard to start a company, and most companies don't actually succeed. And especially here in Silicon Valley, it's almost fashionable to start a company. It's almost taken for granted that you should start a company. The reality is 95% of the people should never start a company. Starting a company is for the outsiders. It's for the underdogs. It's for the true believers. It's for people who have some burning need or passion or desire, or perhaps even pressure that forces them to go down that path. That is the reality of where those true crazy startup stories come from. That said, it's always a good time to start a company if you decide that you want to do it. People tell me good companies are started in downturns. Good companies are started in the middle of a boom. Good companies are started at the bottom of a downturn. Netflix was started in 1998, right at the heart of the dot-com boom. Cisco, Microsoft was started in the middle of the greatest recessions that we had seen in the economy. So there's no particular time from an external factor when you should start companies. Google was started when there were 100 other search engines already active in terms of a competitive landscape. So whatever dimension you look at, there is no right or wrong time to start a company, except when you have it on the inside, when you have that conviction, when things come together that require and desire you to go down this very difficult path.
Yeah, just to add a little bit more to Ashmeet said, that I made this transition in 2016 and I thought long and hard about it, right? Especially kind of going into healthcare. If you think that building a company is hard, multiply that by 10 to 15x, right? That's how the healthcare market is and how healthcare entrepreneurship is, because a normal sale might be a couple of months. In a regular startup, it's like 18 to 20 months in healthcare, right? I think the key thing here is the obsession and the passion, right? Do you wake up at night thinking about the problem, about how to potentially solve it? Are you obsessed enough to keep up to date with everything that's happening in terms of literature, in terms of innovation in that space, right? Without that obsession and passion and patience to kind of like see through difficult times and get it right, it's very hard to be an entrepreneur, right? There are some absolute high days when you think that you're king of the world and you sign your first customer, you get your paycheck. There are absolute like low days, right? When you hear that, say, Microsoft or Apple or Google's kind of like trying to take this on, and customers are going to them, right? So you have to have like more of a even keel to be able to modulate yourself across all these things. And the only way you're going to have that is that belief and that passion for that problem.
I will just add, 1-2 cents more to that. I would just classify companies under two kinds of categories, which I think is important for entrepreneurs to think on that. One is, I work for a law firm and I'm leaving to start my own law firm. I'm working for an accounting firm. I'm working for IT services firm. And those are one kind of companies, and that's one kind of intention. When we talk in terms of venture context of certain kind of companies, these are companies, usually there is a certain box that you have to define. Usually you have to be number 1 or 2 in those boxes to survive and thrive. Otherwise, eventually you perish. And for those kinds of companies, it is not just, you're not doing it primarily just to make a living. There's whatever you define as the key mission of the company, you just have to go nonstop and press the gas for a very, very long time. You essentially have to be a leader or one of the leaders in that. Otherwise, the company will. So for those kind of companies, I think what Ashok was talking about, you need to really have a very strong, I would say, a burning why this needs to happen and why you should be doing it right now. Otherwise, that momentum and the you run out of gas after a certain point of time if you don't you have that.
Mm-hmm. Here's a quick test you can use if you want to confirm whether it's a good time for you to start a company or not. Make a list of all the things that you have in your current life today that you are willing to give up to do this startup. And if that list is very short, I don't think you're ready. Are you willing to give up weekends? Are you willing to give up a good salary? Are you willing to give up your retirement plan? Are you willing to give up perhaps a certain number of friends that you have in your life? Those are painful choices you will have to make if you're going to be a great entrepreneur.
Yep.
Yeah, to add to Ashmit's list, vacations, right?
Yeah, vacations, financial security.
Yeah.
Vacations.
That is a great discussion. I see Juliet Marie is here now. Hello.
Welcome, Juliet Marie.
Hello.
Wonderful.
So we just had a round of discussion and a round of introductions, and we started with the first question on when is a good time to start a company, follow corporate career versus, chase your dreams. Is there the right time to do it? So Juliet Marie, you are leading the panel. I'm going to let you continue the discussion here.
Great. So has everyone had a chance to share with us the concern about diversity and inclusion?
We have not covered that.
We have not discussed that yet.
Okay. Can we share with the audience whether or not you have a diversity and inclusion built into your investment thesis? And if you do, why does diversity and inclusion matter?
I'm happy to go first. The short answer is yes, but not in the way most people think about diversity, which may be, for example, demographics, diversity. We talk about race, we talk about geography, etc. I think diversity is incredibly important in the startup ecosystem for entrepreneurship, but it's a different type of diversity. Are you an underdog? Are you an outsider? Are you an independent thinker? Are you a true believer? Are you someone who has the courage of their convictions to be a contrarian? That is the true form, and it's a different form of diversity, which I think is the underpinnings of Silicon Valley, of entrepreneurship, etc. That often also comes with other types of diversity that we sort of more typically talk about. For example, there's a correlation between a lot of companies being started by immigrants. Certainly that happens to be a nice correlation, but in my opinion, that's just a correlation, not a causation. The true causes here are that ability to think outside, be fundamental, be contrarian, etc.
I will say that in our case, it is, I mentioned about, we, a lot of our focus is on investing in companies which are building product out of emerging tech hubs, which could be other parts outside the valley, could be parts I mentioned in the US. We have run company of all places out of Lincoln, Nebraska, out of Austin, Atlanta. We have many, a lot of our companies are building product out of places like India. So we are certainly see that both from a business perspective, I think there's access to great talent in many of these geographies outside the core sort of Silicon Valley ecosystem, as well as I think it also provides greater economic opportunity in those areas. So we see both of it has a dual impact in those geos. And in my own personal journey, between my careers at different venture firms, I started a company which was developing sustainable pesticides, which is not my background at all. I'm most of software, but some of the topics we talked about was around a strong burning passion, which I thought was a area that needed the world needed something, and I felt that's something I wanted to do, and I joined in that, and then we actually of all places had a team out of rural Iowa, and then we had headquarters in Silicon Valley, but most of our team was in rural Iowa, and we had people from very different backgrounds in that company. We had given a significant part of our equity to a nonprofit that we cared about. So the whole idea of, like, inclusion, diversity is certainly an important part of the lens of how we look at the world.
I'll add something in terms of diversity and the founding team, right? Just to kind of talk from a personal example. So we were trying to start a company in healthcare, solving a problem for clinicians, right? And the team was basically 2 technologists. But it was fundamentally important to have a diverse team, both in terms of background and in terms of skill sets and in terms of like race, right? For example, 50% of all doctors who were going to use our product were going to be women, right? And we were 2 male founders who were trying to start the company. So we made a conscious effort to kind of bring in somebody who had that perspective into the team, right? Like, I think diverse teams make really more compelling products, and you need that expertise and the diversity in background to kind of make good products. For example, one of our key engineers, he was actually a game designer, right? He had no background in enterprise SaaS or anything else, but he had a game design background, right? And he brought that into the picture. Another person was a travel blogger, right? And she liked to go to like all these very interesting, hard to reach places like North Korea and others. And that brought in a unique twist to our product, right? So I think diversity is what makes startups create really compelling products that appeal to all their user base, right? And not just another typical cookie cutter that any other company would create.
Great. Is there anyone else who would like to share?
I will just add a very brief thought, which is that diversity is a critical element to make up for lost time and for past practices that were not fair. I think it's those who have the ability to influence that. I think it's important to keep that in mind. And we just have many opportunities in our daily lives to think along those lines, and I think it's important.
Right. I'm a part of TechCrunch this year, and it's a virtual event. Mm-hmm. And this morning, one partner said that she arrived here in Silicon Valley 20 years ago, and it took years, almost 2 decades before her company had a female partner, or a partner of who's a minority, of diversity. So the good thing about this panel is all of us have been here in Silicon Valley probably for a good period of time. It's only taken sort of the death of George Floyd for a lot of the top venture capital firms here in Silicon Valley to really say, I don't have any Black founders in my portfolio. I don't have enough women representation in my portfolio. I don't have enough, immigrants represented in my portfolio. So is it really important for them to continue to take the lead, to push for diversity and inclusion?
Well, I'll tell you a brief anecdote that I heard from a highly successful Indian entrepreneur. And he, when he was starting his company, this was about 25 years ago, when he started his company. Since then, he has done exceedingly well. He's one of the pioneers. And he goes to a venture capitalist and says, hey, this is my plan, and I'm seeking venture funding. And he had a really, really good plan. And, you know, the venture capitalist looked at him and said, you know, we've actually never funded an Indian-led company. And this actually goes more than 25 years. This is probably more than 35 years or so. And he said that the next thing he said was, and I think it's about time. And he wrote a check. So there is, you know, it's not, there's change that happened at different points in time, and hopefully that would change again. But yes, the short answer to your question is absolutely. There's no reason that should not be the case, where they seek to, you know, look for and encourage and bring on board and promote and pay well and do all the things that they should be doing for people who are not as well represented.
Good. Anyone else with insights to share?
Now, I would just add that I think what what many investors have realized is about focusing on building a diverse set of networks, so they're able to see entrepreneurs from different backgrounds, and you know, currently they may or may not have access to those networks, but being more thoughtful in building the networks, so they're able to get to make sure that entrepreneurs are able to reach you from different backgrounds. I think that is something certainly many investors are realizing, and I think you know, to a different extent, but investors are taking efforts to make that a reality.
Great. Can we spend some time talking about how venture capital tends to validate a company, and why the venture capital funding matters to a lot of startups?
Sure. I mean, you know, as a practicing venture capitalist, I often describe the act of taking venture capital, raising money, partnering with a venture capitalist as a package deal. In other words, it is not just a set of dollars that is going to flow from an investor into the company, but in the best of circumstances, it truly is a partnership. And yes, you are bringing validation. In other words, there is a signal that here are some people who believe in me. Here are people who believe that I'm going to generate high returns, because that is the goal of venture capital. They are staking their reputation with you. And so there is a flow and there is an association that comes with that. And then there is all the help that comes, the network that a venture capitalist may help you. There is the advice that comes in terms of actually sharing your own thought processes. Venture capitalists will roll up their sleeves and sometimes work with you in ways that are quite deep and quite extensive. Just yesterday, we saw the IPO for Snowflake. That's a company that, you know, today it's trading at $60 billion or $70 billion. That's a company that was incubated inside a venture capital firm, where the general partners of the venture capital firm act as the CEO of the company multiple times. I mean, that's part of the model of that venture capital firm. So I would summarize it by saying, absolutely, there is huge signal in it, but signal again does not guarantee a result. Best of venture capitalists have invested in companies that have not succeeded. It just means that you are getting some help. There's a correlation. There is a directional indication. At the end of the day, companies win or lose based on their own efforts and their own success. And so don't confuse success with raising venture capital. But yes, it will help you. And yes, it is a signal when you can raise high quality venture capital.
Great, thank you.
I would say there are two key aspects, right? I think the venture capital investment is good validation on you as an entrepreneur, but the true measure of success and the true measure of like really validating that what you're building is valid, is useful, is two things. One is actually deploying something and seeing a customer use it, right? And two, when people find value enough to actually pay you for it, right? I actually think the first check that you get for your product is a lot more important than the first VC dollar that kind of comes in, right? In fact, not all companies are meant for venture capital. That's another whole discussion. But the most important validation that you as an entrepreneur get is the first check that you get from your customer, and the first time they use the product and they see value and they go like, okay, I can't live without it, right? Like, I think those, in my opinion, are two bigger keys to an entrepreneur satisfaction and validation than a VC check.
Great. Anyone else?
So I would just echo what Ashmeet was saying, that the role of a VC, for a companies which are on a path to become on a high growth trajectory, the recipe book is often about doing few things but doing them really well. And many entrepreneurs instinctively, when they think about doing big, they think about doing many things. So one role of a VC, which we often play, is about helping them think through what are the things they should not be doing as an entrepreneur. You should often have to narrow down your focus. You have to pick what your core competency is. And that's many times counter thesis to many entrepreneurs when they think about building something big. But that's, again, and investors who've been through that journey with many companies, play a unique role there.
Let me share one other perspective from the, and bring in again this element of diversity, which we started the conversation with by asking the following question, which I believe every entrepreneur and VC should ask themselves, which is, what is your goal for, in this case, diversity, for example? Why are you thinking about it? What are you doing? For a venture capitalist, I believe diversity increases returns. So you should seek it out because it is your job to seek high returns. And therefore it is something that you should actively look for from that perspective. But you may have a different goal. You may have a political goal in terms of improving society. You may have a social science goal in terms of making the world a better place. That is a perfectly valid goal for people to have. But my mentor, Catherine Gould, who was the founder, a woman venture capitalist, the first woman to start a venture capital firm here in Silicon Valley. And this question would often be asked of her. And she would say, look, if you want to make the world a better place, there are better and more direct ways of doing it than either entrepreneurship or venture capital. You can be a lawyer, you can be a politician, you can be a police person. There are many, you can be active in human rights. There are many other vehicles and approaches available to you. Your job as an entrepreneur is to build a company and to build the greatest and the best company that you can. That is really the job of an entrepreneur. And insofar as diversity helps you in that, that is the way that's the lens through which you have to evaluate that particular, that particular question. It turns out that it actually helps. And so that's, a fortuitous sort of circumstance that we find ourselves in.
Great. I like how you shared that venture capitalists and venture capital firms, they're not just there to write the checks, but they're there to offer the resources. They're there to be the mentors. As a final sort of round of questions before we go into Q&A, can you each share the most memorable mentoring experience that you've had with entrepreneurs?
In fairness, I think this question should be asked of our entrepreneurs who we have mentored. So I don't know if I should give examples where I was mentored by my mentors. I mentioned Catherine Gould earlier, where she was, you know, a tremendous influence on my life in terms of teaching me venture capital, in terms of showing me, you know, what is a way in which a venture capitalist practices their craft. I have certainly tried to do the same with my mentees. But then there I am not acting as a venture capitalist. There I'm acting as an operating executive, as someone who previously ran a company who's trying to help them either recruit a person, sell a customer, shape a product, perhaps get an acquisition done, etc. And those are the roles that stand out. I'm trying to think of one very memorable anecdote which I can share with you, but nothing is popping in right now. So I'll give my fellow panelists some time to see if they have an anecdote they'd like to share.
Yes, sure. I asked because I think it will generate ideas from the audience when we open up to Q&A.
I'll share my my view. I was a senior banker with a large investment bank. I mentored 3 minority analysts, financial analysts, and I taught them whatever I knew in finance and helped them in their application. All 3 ended up at top business schools and have done very well since. So it's really very gratifying when you are able to do that. I also wrote recommendations from them. I usually write recommendations only for people that I actually know. And so I was able to write very personable and very powerful letters. Of course, they had great backgrounds to begin with, but you know, that extra help, I think, was also beneficial. So.
Good. Thank you.
So for me, I think it kind of boils down to 2 things, right? Like being a coach for them, not fishing for them, but teaching them how to fish, right? Like using the common analogy there. And sometimes when you kind of, and investing time in them and being there for them whenever they need you, right? I think those are the 2 main things that I really value about my mentoring experience. And specifically, there's one founder, minority founder that I was mentoring, and he had this fairly massive challenge in front of him, right? In healthcare, he didn't know how to kind of go through, or he had like too many options. He didn't know how to decide. And part of being a mentor is sometimes you see and you have a strong opinion to say that this is what you should do, and here's why you should do it, right? But if you do that, you're not being a true mentor, right? Like, so you hold back. Then you try to ask them the right series of questions to kind of get to the right outcome, right? And invariably, when you do that, you learn something yourself about yourself in terms of like what you kind of like thought about it. And in this particular scenario, we went through discussions. You spend like 3 to 4 hours a week over a 5-week period to finally get him to a point where he came out with a suggestion and he came out with an outcome which even blew my own expectations, right? And that company now is a super successful mental health company out there, right? It's not something I'd anticipated. It's not something that he'd anticipated. It's being able to leverage your time and coach people to do something that they themselves are not thought possible. And being able to do that with founders is where I derive the most pleasure.
Good. Thank you.
So one story I have to share is, so I'm quite passionate about yoga and meditation. It's a big part of my life. I spend about a couple of hours on that every day, and it's been made a huge difference to my quality of life and my effectiveness at work and many other aspects of life. And one of the things I share with our entrepreneurs is that normally they're so busy just doing stuff. Obviously there's no shortage of the to-do list is never-ending to-do list, but about how important is it to invest time on themselves, on their own growth, making sure they have a healthy mind and body to be able to be effective leaders for their organizations. And to one of a founder who I'd invested in many years ago, I had shared that, and then he was motivated by my sharing to take on that same program, and then he felt a lot of benefit. His company was eventually acquired by VMware. It was a good, successful exit. And he went later on shared that particular that time he invested on his was such a critical part of his journey as an entrepreneur that he would not have made it had it not been for that investment of time. So that was very gratifying, for me to hear that.
I think I've got an anecdote finally, so let me jump in with
Yes.
with what I think made a huge impact in one case. I have a CEO, happens to be a woman, first-time CEO. So we are clearly, checking some boxes over here, but that's, like I said, is mostly a coincidence. And right after I made the investment, on the very first conversation that we had, I said to her, make mistakes. It is part of your job to make mistakes. She was surprised. That was obvious. That was not what she was expecting. That was not what sort of where the conversation she thought would go. And I said, let's just, I'm with you. The reason I've invested is because I believe in you. I am here because I believe we have a great opportunity, but no opportunity is perfect and no execution is perfect. Mistakes are part of your job. You have my support to go and take risks. And I believe that I made a material impact on the path that that company is following and the success of this CEO in her trajectory. And it's still unproven. I can't point and say that, this is what the outcome was, but I do feel very passionately that that was the right advice and is the right relationship between a venture capitalist and their CEO.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you. Well, shall we open it up to Q&A now?
Yeah, I think so. We have some questions. People, do you want to ask?
Start. Hi, I'm Eva. I currently work at Deloitte, and I'm also really passionate about AI in healthcare and the ethical AI space. So just to revisit the conversation on diversity, I'm just wondering if there's more to this lens, because I see in my own work, so for example, women startups receive 3% of the funding, but they make double the revenue. And then when we talk about women, especially in corporate America, I've seen in women in tech groups, we struggle with, oh, I don't play golf, I don't watch sports, how do we network? I've had Black coworkers who are going back to get their master's or their PhD because their values are regarded as less in comparison to their peers. And then when we talk about checking boxes, I think diversity is more than that, because when you have people all of a similar racial, ethnic background, you're missing out on a network, you're missing out on consumers, you're missing out on opportunities to make your product better in terms of delivering value to your consumers. So, and then also when we talk about venture capital, you're investing in these firms by offering mentorship, you're offering funding, you're offering resources, especially in the tech space. A lot of these companies are doing work in AI ethics. So these things really do kind of trickle down by choosing not to actively pass the ladder down and make your own approach to investing more diverse.
Are you still at Deloitte, or have you set up a company?
I just finished my first year at Deloitte. I'm still here.
Mm-hmm. Any plans to set up a company?
I'm considering right now going back to school to get my PhD, but I'm hoping to continue down this path in ethical AI.
Great, great. Thank you. Would
So
any of...
Yes, one of the audience questions we got in the chat is that what role can for-profit startups plan in promoting social good?
They are intrinsic and fundamental to promoting society. We live in a capitalist society. The rules of capitalism were identified, hundreds of years ago. And the reality is a lot of good comes from that. That has been the greatest force for lifting people out of poverty, for empowering people, for creating social societies that are more meritocratic. Again, that doesn't mean that they are perfect. That doesn't mean that there aren't problems or there aren't issues that come with it, or that doesn't have to be regulated. But certainly capitalism and for-profit is a very, very powerful force, which can be harnessed in whatever way that we choose to harness it for. But yes, absolutely.
So, I mean, I would just also add to that. One of the key drivers of why you create a company is often because there's certain values you care a lot about, or there's certain impact you want to drive in the world that you care deeply about, which is why you're starting a company. So a number of entrepreneurs I know who are running, for-profit startups, but are deeply driven by creating a certain social impact or whatever they care about. So I don't see there's a disconnect between them. Um, the word for-profit just means that there is an economic, they're also making an economically viable venture, which can sustain itself. Now, to what extent what is the trade-off that you make between economics and other objectives you have? I would say that is a contract between the owners of the company and so you as a founder need to choose the right shareholders in the company who are aligned with your mission and the right balance, and the trade-offs you're making. And as long as you're doing that, you're choosing the right shareholders who are aligned with whatever trade-off you're making, I would say they can both be accomplished in a very comfortable way. That was, for example, when I did my own startup, that was our goal, and we accomplished that in terms of how we achieved our shareholder base. But I felt that's something that can be very doable.
Thank you.
I want to just address Eva's point. I think she was basically saying that there is a group of people who feels excluded because they're not part of the network. And that is 100% true. There's no doubt that's the case. And I myself, I'm a member of a fairly prominent club in San Francisco. And I was walking down the hall. I am a member, and there's another member who was walking in the opposite direction and asked me if they can help me, clearly assuming that I'm just walking down the halls with no purpose, right? Wow. So I think that is absolutely the case. And there are a couple of strategies that people, I think, should think about in terms of addressing this. One is on the part of the people who might unconsciously or subconsciously or even deliberately do that. I think there needs to be just an awareness of what they can do to be more inclusive. On the other side, I would say that this is going to take a fair amount of work, and it's going to take a fair amount of commitment. And I think there are a lot of excellent people in all different backgrounds. So I think it's going to take a lot of work on both parts to rectify it. But there is definitely a part of the system that is inaccessible to other people. And that's just the way it is today, and how it gets fixed down the road, that remains to be seen.
Just to add a little bit more to what Ashok said, right? I think there are some things that we can do as entrepreneurs and investors to kind of like remove that implicit bias in this, right? Like whether it's doing like blind resume scans to make sure we bring in people that we don't let the call or the name influence our decision making, right? I've even tried this once where I've started to remove like the team slide from pitch decks. Mm-hmm. Right? So don't put a name to it. Like just let this problem and the solution stand in its own merit, right? And see what people are going to say that. So kill the team slide. I think those are things that we can do both as entrepreneurs and operators, as well as investors, to kind of really promote and let the idea shine and the problem shine, over bringing in all these implicit biases, right? Like, I think that's one thing. I do want to kind of go back to that, the social good thing. I spent a lot of time at Salesforce, and I really saw Mark kind of promote the social enterprise and how the business of companies right now is to actually do good, right? Like, I think if you really look at it, most of the social pushback has come from CEOs, right, in these past 3 years. They've led the way in terms of banning things. They've led the way in terms of making more inclusive. They've led the way in terms of even bringing the overall mask mandate, right? Like, I think the CEO's role has now become a lot more important as a social leader and not just as a corporate leader, right? Cool. And one of the things that I really took away from his philosophy, which I would encourage every entrepreneur to kind of deploy, is the 1-1-1 model, right? So Salesforce's 1-1-1 model basically says that 1% of your employees' time, 1% of your profits, right, and 1% of your products, you want to kind of like pump it back for social good into the startup ecosystem, right? And we did this right now. So for example, 1% of all the products that we created at Suki, we started giving it out free to these remote health workers, right, who are traveling across various parts of the country to kind of provide healthcare for free, right, to people who can move. And we just gave our product away for free. And that was very eye-opening because one, there is this innate sense of happiness when you see these people use it, right? So it brings that personal connection, saying your product's being used to do something good. And also selfishly, it also makes your product better, right? You learn something new, you learn various use cases, which kind of makes you a better company and a better product in service for everybody. So anybody who's really thinking about entrepreneurship, I would really encourage you to kind of deploy the 1-1-1 model very early in your journey and make that a core part of your DNA.
Excellent. I love how you shared with us about Mark, because not only is he a great philanthropic leader in the corporate tech world, but he's a catalyst, because a year ago or 2 years ago, the tech billionaires, they were laughing at him for being so philanthropic and so transparent about being a good tech company. And then at the start of this year, I was impressed with how that knock-on effect has happened. I mean, with Jack Dorsey donating $1 billion this year to the rapid COVID global response, and then talking about educating girls and the health of girls. You know, all of that really came from Mark's leadership. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah, Marie, I think this is very interesting. So we took a seed check from Mark, right? Like when I was starting this company, went to him and we talked about this. And I distinctly remember soon after he cut the check, he emailed saying, have you done this yet? Have you deployed 1-on-1, right? And next time I actually met him, that was his very first question, right? So it's one thing to say something, it's another, it's super important to follow up and make sure it actually gets done, which I think is something I really appreciate about him.
Absolutely, thank you.
Juliet Marie, I think Pamela has a question she wanted to ask.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, Pamela.
Oh, great. Okay. So I guess my question, I'm sitting here, I'm listening to everyone. Thank you, Shilpi, for this wonderful conference, and everyone, all of the panelists, for your insights and your experience and leadership. But I'm sitting here listening to everyone, and honestly, as a 30-year veteran technologist, I'm feeling a bit of a disconnect with what I'm hearing. I'm an African-American woman, and I've worked in technology for over 30 years. I'm also a private airplane pilot, a helicopter pilot, and soon to be author. I'm developing a framework for AI risk ethics. And my experience with most Asian men and most Asians in general is that they're racist against Black Americans. They discriminate. They don't view us as equal. They don't invite us to lunch. Oh my God. I've never been invited to lunch by someone who was Indian. And I'm in my 50s in the New York City area. Which I think goes to the young lady's point about social connections. In my churches, in our Black and African American museums, I don't see people who look like you. Never. It's as if, so I think that there's definitely a cultural bias, and you know, many of my Black friends in tech have told and shared with me the same thing. that that many Indian and Asian men are incredibly discriminatory. To say that diversity is not about race or gender, but that it's about mindset is an appropriation of the term diversity. Diversity was born out of the civil rights movement in this United States, which was meant to be a primary benefit to marginalized groups, particularly African Americans. It's not a term that says, you know, where she likes to wear, you know, she likes jazz music and he likes blues music, so we have a diverse group of thinkers on the team. It relates to primarily race and gender cultural background.
Hi,
And
Pamela.
so,
Sorry to interrupt you. Is there a question for the panelists here? And we are
Hold on, Shilpi. I wouldn't necessarily interrupt her at this juncture, but I think, Pamela, do you mind if I kind of, because we only have 3 minutes left, and I think what they're trying to do is allow for you to answer and give this panelist the answer. I
so
have
my question is, what is your response? That's the question. I don't have a specific question.
Let me jump in very quickly.
Can I wait, before your response, can I just put this in there? All right, based on what you said, I'm an inventor who lives in Silicon Valley. I've got several patents. The pedigree of my labs is we own the patent for the hashtag.
What's your name?
That's how far advanced we generally are in our work. And I've personally seen everything that Pamela is talking about. So one of the things that I would love to know and understand, I think Pamela is asking, is what are you and your company doing to make inroads in diversity in your portfolios of your companies?
No, Taurean, stop. That's the problem. You're not speaking for me. I'm speaking for me. I don't need you to paraphrase what I'm saying or speak for that. That's an example of mansplaining. Let me ask my own question. My question wasn't how are you using this in your portfolio of your VC. We only have 2 minutes to your point. My question is simply, what is your response to my heartfelt statements? I'm not looking for money from you. If I wanted money, I'm going to Black people. I'm not looking to go to lunch or socialize. I don't need you. But I'm sharing with you an experience that many people are feeling and thinking, especially with Kamala Harris now as potential vice president, but we're not talking. Blacks don't view Indians as our friends. If you've never heard that, then remember my name and you've heard it now. And my question simply is, what are your thoughts on it? Thank you.
Pamela, it's a very deep question. And since we have very limited time, I'll just say this is not an area that I personally have studied. There are certainly lots of people who are better qualified and more experienced in understanding this. But certainly the problems that you say exist, and I will acknowledge them and accept that some of those problems exist, that we can debate the degree to which they exist and what the solutions are, but that doesn't obviate the other elements which also exist at the same time in terms of how Silicon Valley works or how companies are built or what's important in a company. Both are simultaneously true.
Does any of the other panelists have something to add? Please do so, like we are running out of time. Do you have any insights or answer to Pamela's question?
I will only say that, first of all, I greatly appreciate you sharing your thoughts, and I can certainly relate to them. And as far as the Indian culture goes, I will say that whatever discrimination you might have noticed from colleagues who are of Indian background, I don't think it's limited only to one class of people. India, of course, as you may know, was the sort of the birthplace of the caste system. And so discrimination of that kind is a long history in India, and it persists to this day. So it's not to condone or make that acceptable in any way. I'm just saying that that's the cultural background, and some of it may be carrying it. Some people may be carrying it. I personally have a lot of Black friends, but I don't. I'm not one to overgeneralize. That there are people who are extremely good, and there are some people who are not that good, and that's the background. And so I think that might be what you might have observed.
And on behalf of my Indian friends, I would like to, even though I don't think of myself as representing the community, I would like to invite you to a lunch next time you are in the Bay Area, and let's solve that problem once and for all.
Yeah.
I'm saying this to lighten
Absolutely.
the mood and to make you feel better.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think Pamela brought up a very valid point. This is a melting pot, America. And as a melting pot, we really need to have more solidarity. I appreciate her sharing, and I think it comes from that real need. We don't need to be divisive. We don't need to be in our different clubs and cliques. We're stronger together. If anything, that's what COVID has taught us all. We're in this together. And she spent 30 years in the tech space and ecosystem. And I think we all want to be included.
Yes. This has been such an awesome panel and great discussion. I think we definitely need to be honest, starting with, having such honest discussions and not shy away from them. That is the first step to bringing change. And I'm grateful to everyone, the panelists, Juliet Murray, the moderator, excellent moderation, and to Pamela and other attendees who have asked difficult questions. These are not easy questions, and we sometimes shy away from them, but thank you for raising those questions. So we are all mindful of what we are doing and how we are doing and how it makes others feel, even though we may not. That's called implicit bias. We don't even know about it, but it makes others feel like our actions say something else, right? So let's be mindful of those. And thank you again, everyone, for joining us for this great session, and hope you'll continue on the other side. We have a whole round of afternoon sessions lined up for you. Take care.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
It was
Thank
great.
you.
Thank you.